Hola, ¿cómo has estado?
Life is good. I'm happy to be with you here today.
Sí, también me alegra mucho que estés aquí hoy, que hayas sacado de tu tiempo para estar hoy en esta entrevista. Eh, bueno, voy a hacerte algunas preguntas bastante interesantes que, bueno, de nuevo, agradecerte por estar aquí. Me interesa mucho tener tu visión en este proyecto. Te he seguido muy de cerca los logros que has tenido en la industria de la salud, de la alimentación consciente, del fitness, de hábitos para mejorar la vida, para mejorar la salud de las personas. Y me gusta mucho el enfoque que tú le das a todo esto. Es un enfoque bastante diferente al convencional. Así que me gustaría iniciar haciéndote una pregunta y es, ¿cuál fue tu motivación inicial para comenzar con este estilo de vida y para comenzar a promover esto con las demás personas? ¿Qué te ha motivado a iniciar en esto?
Yes, it's interesting, David, because it's a similar stories in some ways to yours. I was trying very, very hard to pursue running mostly as a sport. I'd been athletic growing up and played all sorts of different sports, but running, especially running on trails and in the woods, was one that really struck me as something that I wanted to keep doing, even into adulthood. But in doing so, especially as part of the culture back then, loading the body with carbohydrates or taking a whole lot of grains and sugars, whether they be food or drink, into the body was kind of part of the culture, part of what most runners did. And when you combine that with going to the doctor back then, I'm going about like 15 years ago back in time now. Uh, a lot of the messaging was around making sure that you avoided dietary cholesterol, making sure that you avoided dietary saturated fat. And so, by virtue of doing that, you need to kind of turn one thing up and turn other things down. So, I really avoided red meat, I avoided fat, I avoided anything that had cholesterol in it, and continued to run about 30 miles a week. And over the course of time, following my doctor's advice and some of the advice from running magazines and things like that back then, I started to put on weight very predictably, and it made me uncomfortable in multiple ways. But also, the worst part about it was looking at my biomarkers. When I went into the doctor, we had blood and urine tests, and I was watching all of my biomarkers get worse over the course of trying so hard to be healthy. And so it wasn't until I re-examined my approach, and that took basically a life crisis. I lost everything in an apartment fire. And when I had basically no possessions, I looked at myself in the mirror in my early 20s and I said, listen, Bob, this isn't working. My face was clearly inflamed. I was a good 30 plus pounds overweight. I felt like I was a middle-aged man who was tired every afternoon, could barely get out of bed in the morning. And once again, this was by trying exceedingly hard to follow the rules and the advice that came mostly from the medical establishment. And once I re-examined that and embraced eating foods from kind of a different paradigm, which is looking at the natural world, what would humans have eaten centuries ago or even thousands of years ago based on what would be available to us. You look at food and it would have been much less processed. We would have been eating many fewer grains per day, maybe none at all. We would have been eating most likely a lot less sugar, and we wouldn't have been afraid of eating meats, red meats, saturated fats. We would have been focusing on filling up our bellies and making sure that we had enough calories to get through the day and thrive as a community. So by switching the way that I did things and embracing intermittent fasting or a compressed eating window around the same time, all of a sudden I found that I had a large degree of control over my body composition, and my performance athletically improved incredibly. And so I started running marathons for fun instead of shorter distances. That was kind of my max before, and I wasn't even that fast anymore. All of a sudden I found that I could get to single digit body fat. I could run marathons, and I didn't need to rely on carbs to do that. And so that was very freeing to me. And then right around that, I got so mad and passionate about being wrong and being wrong so hard that I started off a blog, started writing about health, later a podcast, which has been going on for about 12 years, wrote some more books about it. And so ever since, it's absolutely been a passion and a hobby and somehow a career as well.
Wow, es una historia, tienes razón, un poco similar a la mía y te entiendo. Me gusta mucho el enfoque que le das a la salud pensando mucho en cómo lo hacía el ser humano antes, porque realmente el ser humano en la etapa evolutiva llevamos muy poco tiempo y en nuestros genes aún están guardados, por decirlo de algún modo, estos recuerdos de cómo solía ser esta alimentación y realmente se pueden volver a reactivar estas cosas que nos permitían estar sanos en una época antigua donde necesitábamos estar sanos, donde no teníamos alimento a diario, donde necesitábamos aprovechar la comida que teníamos, de ahí también lo que mencionas del ayuno intermitente. Y también me gusta mucho un concepto que tú has mencionado algunas veces y es de la alimentación consciente. ¿Podrías explicarme un poco a qué se refiere la alimentación consciente y qué
Yes.
significa esto para ti?
Well, being very intentional about what you're eating. And one thing that I say in my book is you want to eat foods that have been recently alive well. And so when you look at most of the foods that many of us have been eating, especially in modern times, it's food that was grown a long time ago. Maybe the apples that you're eating were sitting in the belly of a ship somewhere across the world for months and months and months on end. And so they go through all of these extra levels of waxing and processing various foods, or foods have been freeze dried, frozen, overly processed, and then they sit there for a long time. So contrast that with eating from a backyard garden, as many of us used to do, or eating wild edible foods that you can actually find in the woods behind you or out in the fields behind you. These foods are full of more than just calories and macronutrients. They're full of, and it can get spiritual for some people as well, thinking that your food is alive and eating that life, eating that source, being conscious of how all of this works. Even if it's just the placebo, it still works. Believing in your food and believing that it means something is very important for people to get results over time. And so if you're just thinking of your body as a widget and you're thinking of burning calories one at a time like an incinerator, maybe you're some kind of machine and that works for you. But for most people, most humans, it's a more emotional and spiritual journey than that. And you also want to hopefully eat food from a world that you believe in. And so what that means is instead of eating from one crop, large monoculture, monocrops basically, where you're growing a heck of a lot of GMO corn all in one place and at the expense of every other plant and every other animal. That means that you're killing all of the other plants that would naturally be there. You're killing all the animals that you now call pests so they won't eat the corn. And you're spraying all these pesticides, which requires a lot of external input from other industries, like petrochemical industries, to yield a productive crop. They're two different systems, and the natural world, especially when you look at regenerative agriculture, when you look at the way that a farm that has plants and animals on it is supposed to work, the animals and the plants have a symbiotic relationship that enhance each other's health in a well-balanced ecosystem. And if you build enough well-balanced ecosystems in different places, where different countries, different parts of the world where we're all eating from, especially if you keep it local and try to keep those external inputs from the petrochemical industries and other industries out of the equation, then all of a sudden you can save a lot of money and improve your health and improve the environment all at the same time. And you don't have to give up eating animal foods to do so. And I think that's a very important point to make right now. You can, of course, elect not to eat animal foods, as many people do. But is that for the sake of your health or the sake of the environment or some other reason? Is it corporate propaganda? A lot of times it's some combination of those things, but the perspective that I take and many people who I align with are pretty clear about the fact that you do not have to give up eating healthy animal foods for the sake of your health or for the sake of the environment.
No, entiendo completamente lo que dices y comparto tu pensamiento porque hace unos 3 años yo fui a Croacia y tuve la oportunidad de vivir un año completo en una especie de centro de meditación, centro ecológico en Croacia, y allá cultivaba mi propio alimento. Nunca había tenido la experiencia de cultivar mi propia comida, de preparar la comida cuando apenas acabo de tomarla directo de la tierra. Y noté un cambio en mi salud que no había notado en mucho tiempo, en muchos años. Mejoró durante el tiempo que estuve allá, mejoró mi piel, mejoró mi visión, mejoró mi cuerpo, incluso aunque no estaba haciendo suficiente deporte, pero igual noté un cambio significativo en mi forma física con el solo hecho de consumir alimentos que estaba cultivando yo mismo y que tenía ahí. Aunque luego fue muy duro la transición de volver a la ciudad y de volver al mundo y de encontrarme con que ya era más difícil conseguir este tipo de alimentos y continuar con este mismo estilo de vida que el que tenía cuando estaba en esta granja casi en el medio de la nada. Entonces, encuentro que a veces se hace un poco más difícil continuar con algo así de saludable en el mundo actual en la ciudad. Y para mejorar esto, creo que habrá que cambiar la visión o lo que piensa mucha gente y muchas cosas con muchas industrias. Como tú dices, ya los alimentos vienen algo contaminados con cosas que no son beneficiosas para nosotros. Pero yo que viví una alimentación como la que tú estás planteando y más consciente, que también es una forma muy poética, muy linda de ver la comida y la alimentación, noté un cambio bastante significativo en mí y en mi salud. Entonces, de verdad, viví lo que tú estás diciendo en base a la alimentación. Eh, Yendo a otro tema también, ¿tú crees que hay relación entre el estado físico y la alimentación con la capacidad mental y el nivel emocional de las personas? ¿Crees que hay relación entre estas cosas? Porque hay personas que piensan que son dos cosas aparte. Mi capacidad mental o mi estado emocional piensan que es separado a mi estado físico. ¿Podrías hablarnos de cómo es tu visión acerca de esto y cómo podría beneficiar esta alimentación o un estado de vida saludable a tener un mejor estado emocional y una mejor capacidad mental?
Absolutely. For most people who embrace a more meaningful way of eating, it also means a more meaningful way of living your life in general. If you don't really care about food, or you think that it's something that should be sacrificed, or that eating food that's delicious is just being purely hedonistic or something like that, uh, you won't be as well aligned as someone who sees it all as one. This, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Or when you tug it at the roots of a plant that's alive that you're later going to eat, or when you see something that was just alive in the backyard and then you prepare it for dinner and you eat it right away, it's hard to not feel something. I mean, maybe some people don't feel a connection to that, but I would argue that it is important to feel that connection and to work on that connection as much as we can. As humans, it's natural for us to have that connection. And if we don't, then what's your connection to the Pillsbury Doughboy or to Tony the Tiger, some, Lucky Charms and all of these like cartoon. There's not much meaning in looking at corporate advertising and some of the things that they prop up that should be meaningful, like brands and colors. When you can actually identify the foods themselves, I don't know. I get a lot of good feelings from going out into the woods and finding some new wild berries that like we found a mulberry tree here in Texas for the first time this season. I hadn't seen that before. And we were, eating right from it. And it fills me with glee. But anyway, in terms of the mental health conversation, if you're not fueling with the right types of macronutrients and micronutrients, and especially if you're looking at probiotics and prebiotics, there are many probiotics in particular, strains like Lactobacillus reuteri, that have a direct effect in many ways on the way that we feel, not just inside of our guts, but inside of our brains. And so many people, doctors, cardiologists, etc., call the gut, and this is also going back into ancient times, they call the gut the second brain. And so there's a reason that we have gut feelings about things, for positive or for negative. And that has more control over our brain than most of us would like to admit. And so if you're fueling with foods that are packed with the right kind of probiotics, and those probiotics can then feed on some of the plant fibers, the prebiotics, and populate your gut for the long term, you will have a change in your mental state. as well, you can look at food as something that you can overeat, you can undereat, but the times that you spend not eating food when you're fasting, that can be a spiritual experience. It can also be very stoic in some ways, where you're embracing the discipline of not eating right now, or for hours over the course of the day. You're embracing that not eating at all, saying no. And when you do so, your body somehow learns the connection that you don't have to go and reach for sugary foods or caffeine or external substances in order to get your energy and in order to get your motivation. That is something that you inherently have and you build over time. And when you're feeding your body the right kinds of foods, long-term energy will come from that, but you don't need to rely on short-term bursts of energy, like if you walk into a gas station and everything there is meant to give you some hit of caffeine or sugar or nicotine or something like that. When you embrace eating real foods from the natural world and cycling that with periods of fasting, then you have a lot more mental freedom, and myself included, some people would say you have a lot more control over your emotions, a more generally laid back demeanor, because you're not suddenly reaching for, in moments of temptation, food that won't serve you over the long term.
Sabes que nuestro documental se enfoca mucho sobre la longevidad y la salud. Y he estado investigando mucho acerca del tema de la longevidad, más que todo, de la posibilidad de la curación de la vejez o de la reversión de algunos efectos de la vejez. Y me he encontrado con que la mayoría de personas, o incluso algunos expertos que están estudiando del tema, quieren encontrar algo como la píldora mágica, el suplemento mágico, la sustancia mágica, algo que se tomen y ya tengan la salud que buscan o la longevidad que buscan. Yo pienso que es algo que va mucho más allá de eso, que no debemos centrarnos en esperar encontrar esta inyección milagrosa, sino en varias pequeñas cosas que conformen un estilo de vida que nos permitan esta vida más larga y más saludable y esta también posible reversión de la vejez. Opino que es algo mucho más complejo que no solo encontrar un medicamento milagroso. ¿Qué opinas tú acerca del tema? ¿Cómo abordarías tú el tema de una longevidad o de revertir o retrasar los efectos de la edad? ¿Piensas que está bien enfocarnos en una sustancia milagro o piensas que hay que tener un punto de vista diferente y enfocarlo desde otro sentido?
In in some ways, it's a fool's errand, I think, to look for that magic bullet, to look for the one thing that's going to change everything. Because usually when you look at health, it's a cascade. It's a small change that results in many bigger changes that snowball downstream. When you're looking at making small changes over time, for example, if you incorporate fasting, just one day a week, if you try doing a 24-hour fast, or if you just push breakfast a little bit later in the day, you do that a few times a week, you're going to see many changes. But is that because of fasting? Not exactly. It's because not eating is a natural thing for us to do. And when you refrain from eating for certain periods of time, your body adapts against that. And your body adapts to certain ways of training, certain ways of eating in very particular ways and in very positive ways if you're engaging in the right type of action. So, for example, if you want to if you want to gain muscle, if you want to get bigger muscles all over your body, is there one exercise that you're supposed to do that's the absolute best exercise of them all? It would be very difficult to choose one in particular that would result in those sorts of effects. If you move weight over time, your body will break first. It'll break the strands of muscle that you have. You'll become weaker, but as an adaptation over the course of time, your body realizes that it needs to get stronger in order to survive. And so that's what you do. And so you can do that with fasting. You can do that with working out. But if you try to reduce it to just one way of doing things, even one way of fasting, do you fast once a quarter for 3 days, or do you do a 16-8 or 20-4? There are so many different ways of doing it that will be appropriate for different people in different parts of the world, that it's very important not to be too dogmatic in the world of health and especially longevity. Everyone is a little bit different. There are many pillars of health that will remain the same. But I very much agree with you, David, that it's important not to go chasing the magic bullet. That's what a lot of people do when they're trying to lose weight. It's many times due to a lack of focus where you go for, or maybe too much focus, where you go from one diet that's supposed to be the magical diet, the magical pill for you, and you try it really hard for a while, then it doesn't work. So you switch to the next one, which is sold as the magic pill, the magic bullet. Or you try to take a magic pharmaceutical that all of a sudden makes it so you don't age anymore. And I've seen many, specials on television, and I've listened to some podcasts where people talk about that pill, and it is coming, and it's on its way, and we can edit genes now and make it so aging is a thing of the past. I don't know. I don't think that's how the natural world works. I think if you embrace parts of being a healthy person, I asked my grandmother once, for example, she lived into her late 90s. And I said, how do you have a healthy life, and how do you stay alive so long, and why do you feel so well? And she says, if you make good decisions, if you're a good person, you'll have a good life. Your secrets won't be chasing you around. You won't have all these skeletons in the closet, and you won't have abused yourself over the course of time, because it's that separation, it's that lack of cohesion, that lack of oneness that a lot of people have that rips them apart over time. And if you compartmentalize yourself and shut away parts of yourself and then go chasing those magical bullets, you're going to make a lot of money for big corporations, and that's kind of the fuel that runs the Western world especially. But if you try to live for a long time, then it's probably more beneficial to look back in time when you read these stories of people living well until past 100. Sometimes you hear myths of people living a lot longer than that in ancient times. I'm very likely to believe that there are many humans who have lived for well over 100 years in the past few thousand years that we don't know about, because it probably wasn't even that big of a deal back in the day in ancient times to have elders who just lived multiple generations and kept on living. And none of them were taking magical pills. And while they may have practiced some sort of low-tech alchemy, I don't think they found the philosopher's stone or some sort of magical substance that kept them alive. I think that was probably more theoretical, going back to living a good life. And part of that is embracing foods that were recently alive and well, like we were talking about before, making sure that you're not eating at the expense of other people, if that makes sense. You're not overeating, you're not undereating, you're trying to live within balance. And if you can maintain that balance over the course of your life, you're probably going to have a much longer life than the people who are almost pursuing imbalance by virtue of chasing those magic bullets or those magical solutions.
Sí, opino lo mismo que tú. Yo creo que tal vez, porque no me gustaría subestimar la capacidad humana, pienso que tal vez algún día se encontrarán métodos no naturales de alargar la vida, pero pienso que valdría muy poco eh, el tema de estos métodos, porque si yo me inyecto algo, si yo me tomo una pastilla para alargar mi vida, realmente no estaría haciendo nada si sigo teniendo hábitos en el día a día que lo que van a hacer es acortar ese periodo de vida. Entonces, no lograría hacer nada por mí mismo. Por eso pienso que habría que tener un enfoque más integral, de tener un estilo de vida saludable, de nutrirnos de la forma adecuada, porque si no hacemos nada de esto y nos estamos matando a nosotros mismos, de nada al final nos va a servir, aunque en algún momento encuentren una fórmula mágica para vivir más años, no nos servirá de nada si en el tiempo libre vamos a estarnos matando. Así que creo que es importante este mensaje que transmites, y creo que el enfoque debe estar más en cómo vivir una vida más saludable en vez de cómo encontrar la sustancia milagrosa que nos haga vivir esta vida saludable. La respuesta está en nosotros, y está en la misma naturaleza, es lo que yo opino. Y al respecto de esto, quisiera preguntarte, ¿cuál es el obstáculo más grande con el que te has encontrado que pienses que evita que muchas personas puedan vivir esta vida saludable? ¿Cuál sería como ese obstáculo principal que dirías tú? Sé que hay muchos, pero ¿cuál sería el principal a superar para comenzar un estilo de vida más sano?
That's a lovely question. I would actually say now that it's distraction. In in the age of technology, when we all are bombarded with messaging that is meant to take control of our mind, our emotions, in sometimes sinister ways, the chasing the magical bullet has only gotten worse. You know, I started working in the world of health more than 10 years ago, and it was pretty bad then. It's much worse now in terms of the distractions because the solutions are out there. You know, if you want to, like we were talking about before, eating food that is based more from the natural world and regenerative agriculture, you know, according to ancient methods, this has been around for many, many decades. I didn't come up with these ideas. These are more the pillars of health. You know, if you want to get stronger, you should lift weights and use your whole body. And you should be able to run and sprint, and you should go for walks from time to time. These are things that people know that they should do. Like if you look around at a lot of the people, or you ask them who want results but they're not getting them, they know that they're supposed to go for a walk. They know that they're supposed to lift some weights and work out. They know that they're probably supposed to eat less or more of certain foods, but they're not doing it. And that's the main problem. So why are they not doing what they know they should be doing? I would argue it's because of distractions. It's because they're constantly looking for an easier answer because there's nothing you can do about it, really. If you want to lift weights, you have to move weight around. And some people see that as painful, and it can be sometimes. Other people embrace it as a lifestyle, and they focus on the end result of engaging in exercise, and their brains and their bodies have linked that in some way so that they know if they do go out and work out and they break a good sweat, they're going to feel a lot better afterwards. But nothing is going to change the fact that you have to actually show up, lace up your shoes, and get in there, or go out on that run, or whatever it is. Nothing is going to change the fact. Like, just knowing that you should eat vegetables sometimes isn't enough. You still have to cook them. You buy them, prepare them, cook them up, eat them, and then clean up afterwards. And you have to do that not one time, but pretty much every day. And so I think that's what it is. If people had a better, I guess, if they were able to put up shields against technology taking advantage of them, especially taking advantage of their attention, then they would get a lot better results because instead of wasting their time scrolling and swiping and all the rest of it, they could be going for that walk or preparing a healthy meal for themselves and their family and not be so distracted by all of the newfangled things that are supposed to represent the answer that's going to solve all their problems. That's it's really an addiction, chasing that thing, whatever it is, that myth of the one thing that's going to solve all your problems keeps so many people distracted that all of these different diet businesses can just keep on making money, and all these pharmaceuticals can keep on making money treating the symptoms because people aren't showing up and doing the simple things that they already know how to do, but they're just kind of not doing yet. And to be honest, I don't know exactly what the answer is to that, but it might go back to what we were talking about before. If you have a deeper connection to your food and your lifestyle and why you are here and all the rest of that, that can cascade into making the right decisions over time if you see this all as connected instead of just looking for all these random solutions that might be the answer. Who knows?
Claro, eso tiene razón. Los distractores hoy en día con la tecnología juegan un papel importante en el deterioro de la calidad y la salud de las personas. Me parece que la tecnología es una herramienta muy poderosa que no se está usando de la forma correcta y se está usando solo para estas distracciones o estas cosas que crean como hacen que el cerebro generen esta serotonina y estas hormonas que nos hacen sentir bien. Así que ya queremos tener más likes, queremos tener más cosas y nos sumergimos en este mundo y olvidamos que lo podemos usar para algo mucho más importante. Así que comparto tu opinión al respecto de esto. Me gustaría mucho que dieras un mensaje para nuestra audiencia, conforme a todo lo que hemos hablado también. Un momento antes de olvidarlo, tú dijiste algo muy importante sobre el tema de las farmacéuticas y sobre que ahora todo gira en torno a estos intereses económicos y nos encontramos con algo curioso y por eso también decidimos hacer este documental y es que, como habrás visto, vamos a hacer varios viajes y en estos viajes queremos explorar cómo algunas culturas antiguas perciben la vejez, perciben la enfermedad, perciben la salud y encontrar algunos productos naturales que no están recibiendo el suficiente enfoque por la ciencia, que esto lo ha hablado mucho. Por ejemplo, me he encontrado con algunos hongos medicinales que tienen beneficios que se han estudiado científicamente, pero hace varios años, beneficios antioxidantes, beneficios de proteger el ADN contra el daño de la edad, y no están recibiendo suficiente atención por parte de la ciencia. Los están dejando aparte y me parece que la naturaleza ha encontrado la respuesta a muchos males y a muchas preguntas que nosotros nos hacemos y por no querer verla, estamos intentando descubrir la respuesta nosotros mismos por medio de un fármaco, por medio de un estudio nuevo y tal vez la tenemos al frente y no la estamos viendo. Tal vez la naturaleza ya hizo parte del camino y ya nos tiene la respuesta a muchas cosas y no la estamos viendo. ¿Qué opinas tú acerca de esto? De brindarle más enfoque a la naturaleza y de aprovechar la sabiduría que ella ya tiene para brindarnos. Tal vez ya tiene la solución y no la estamos viendo por no estar enfocados en ella, sino en algo que sea más rentable.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the way that our modern culture and society is set up. If you can't squeeze money out of something, it's very likely that its message won't spread very far. It might still exist, and certain people use it all the time, or whatever it is. But if you can't somehow establish ownership over this substance, whether it be a root, a berry, a fruit, a plant, animal food of some kind, or whatever substance, if you can't squeeze money out of it, then most people will probably never hear about it, or at least that it won't become something that's pervasive enough to buy in the store or even buy online. And so that's a tremendous shame because most of the things that have the biggest effect over us are all of those tiny little things adding up. You know, go to the natural world and take the messaging that is within the DNA of these plants and animals that we're eating that are unfettered by commercial interests. You know, they don't exist to turn a profit. They exist as part of the natural world, which heals itself in multiple ways. In many cases, completely unexpected ways. But to your point, I think it's really important to focus on those sometimes very low tech solutions. But some of the most delicious fruit I've ever tasted, and you, I'm sure, as well, fruits and vegetables across the world, you will never see in the grocery store because they don't transport well. You can't just pack them up and wax them and have them look nice enough for people to buy and spend money on, even though they may be 10 or 100 or 1,000 times healthier than all of those things that you find in the store, which hardly even resemble fruits and vegetables from the ancient world anymore. They have been bred and produced and mutated in all sorts of different directions to bump up the sugars or to sometimes they'll contain a heck of a lot of chemicals inside and outside by the virtue of the way that they were raised and produced. And so it's really important to make sure that you don't discount those simple solutions that present themselves almost anywhere you visit. For example, if you make a ferment on the counter, some sort of kombucha or a sauerkraut, it will turn out completely different in every part of the world. You'll be eating different organisms, tiny little organisms that we haven't even discovered yet, that work symbiotically to create this healthy ancient drink or food for us that in many cases is illegal to sell at the store because it hasn't been pasteurized and blasted with heat or homogenized for some foods or gone through other sorts of kind of commercial based or government regulation based processes that now are necessitated to even wind up in the grocery store where you can have access to it. So that's another reason to really embrace wherever you are. Look at what grows naturally around you. Look at what could grow in your backyard. And many people who are more of spiritual disciplines say that the food that you eat that grows there naturally is 1,000 times more healthful than something that doesn't naturally grow there, that's kind of artificially grown. Even if it looks the same or it looks like a beautiful thing to eat, the essence, the source, the magic that's in a wild food that grows exactly where it should in the way that nature intended works magic in our bodies as well. And there are more scientific ways of explaining that and looking at that, but there's definitely truth in it.
Bueno, perfecto, me parece bien porque compartimos un pensamiento similar acerca de estos temas y es muy interesante porque esta es la visión que quiero que transmitas y también es un poco lo que nos ha inspirado a hacer un documental como el que estamos haciendo. Para finalizar, ahora sí me gustaría que dieras un mensaje a la audiencia, un consejo, cómo podría cada persona contribuir a esto, cómo podemos cambiar nuestra forma de pensar o qué recomendaciones nos das para que todos comencemos con este estilo de vida saludable y con este pensamiento diferente y más consciente acerca de la alimentación y de nuestra salud.
As tempting as it is to embrace the future of technology and the future of food and all the advancements there, and there is a lot to look forward to, absolutely, and we're always discovering more. I would argue for most people that it's very important that we look back in time. Look at the way that your grandparents and great grandparents lived. Look at the simplicity, in many cases, of their lifestyle. Look at the lack of distractions. Look at the sometimes, the reasons that people didn't have a lot of food around to overeat is because you couldn't afford it. You couldn't access it. There weren't giant grocery stores everywhere with all these artificial foods that are making us fat and sick. And so if you can find a way to simplify your own life and focus instead with your attention, instead of swiping and scrolling for that next magic bullet or that next magic pill, if you could instead focus on taking that walk, drinking water that is clean and filtered instead of full of chemicals and rocket fuel and pharmaceuticals and whatever else is in there now. If you can focus on making sure that you do maintain a movement practice that focuses on balance, mobility, building strength, and building not just muscle, but your bones over time so that when you do get older, you don't collapse and fall or have trouble maintaining your posture, which can dramatically take away from people's longevity. Oftentimes it's just one simple fall that cascades into more problems over time, such that you're not mobile. So if you can maintain your mobility and you can feed your body the way that it's naturally meant to eat and thrive, by focusing on some of those ancient solutions, by getting some dirt underneath your fingernails, maybe growing something yourself, or certainly visiting a place that produces food that's close to you, being a part of that and making your food more of a communal adventure as well. Going to something like a farmer's market is a great way for people to have more connection to what they're eating. And so the more connection that you have, in many cases, the better off you're going to be. And so try to simplify your life, focus on some of these ancient practices, sometimes ancient foods and substances that can help us along, but be careful of thinking of them as the magical bullet as well, because there's no one. There are many small answers that will eventually lead you to a long and happy life. And I'm just a work in progress as well. I certainly don't have all the answers, and it's very important that most people maintain that open-mindedness, no matter how many years have gone by, no matter how many years you've been in the world of health. It's very important to maintain that open mind, and that way we can embrace the best parts of the past for longevity as well as the promise of the future.
Qué consejo tan bueno has dado, de verdad. Me gustó mucho, hasta me lo tomo para mí mismo. Me parece que es algo supremamente importante y también lo de que no debemos subestimar el pasado. Muchas veces tenemos percepciones de que en el pasado lo dejamos muy a un lado y nos centramos mucho en el futuro, pero estamos olvidando cosas que son muy valiosas para afrontar este futuro. Así que de verdad gracias por tus palabras y por dedicar este tiempo aquí hoy, por sacar tiempo para esta entrevista, por aceptar participar en el documental. Tu conocimiento y tu experiencia en estos temas veo que van a ser muy valiosos para todos. Así que de verdad te agradezco por este momento y por esta conversación.
Thank you, David. It's my honor.